Hello learners, welcome to Learner's Corner. My name is Elizabeth Talat Williams and today I'll be taking you on the topic gender-based violence. So come with me. So today we're going to be talking about what is gender-based violence, what are the different types of forms of gender-based violence that we have, what do you do if at all you experience any form of gender-based violence, how do you prevent yourself from falling a victim or a prey to gender-based violence, and of course we're also going to talk about some of the different types of gender-based violence that we have. So we'll be starting firstly with what is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence basically is any form of violence or abuse perpetrated against somebody by someone that brings about harm to the person. And this harm could either be physical, it could be emotional, and it could be psychological. The underlying factor to gender-based violence is consent. Once consent is not given, then it is a violence. So I'll just quickly put that down. That gender-based violence, which we also call as GBV, is any form of violence perpetrated against a person that brings about harm and is without consent. And so now that we know what gender-based violence is, I'm talking about the different types and forms of gender-based violence. And so the first, of course, which I'm sure you might have heard of already, is rape. And rape is sexual abuse. And this means any form of sexual intercourse that happens with a person without that person giving their outright consent. That's sexual abuse. And we have different types of rape. We have, acquaintance rape. We have strangers rape. We have incest. And what's acquaintance rape? Acquaintance rape is any form of sexual abuse that happens with somebody that you know. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be someone in a relationship with. And of course, we have stranger rape. Stranger rape happens with people that we do not know, right? So it could be someone you have no form of relationship with. And of course, we have incest, and incest has to do with sexual intercourse or activities that happen with family members. And so brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews, nieces, all of these are different types of rape. And thirdly, we have sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has to do with any unsolicited, either be it in touch, be it verbally. I mean, when you walk down the street, a lot of us ladies can actually testify to this, the catcalling. When they say, oh, fine girl, and then somebody taps your buttocks or taps your breast and runs away. All of these are what we call sexual harassment. Okay, so now we're moving straight up to our next subtopic, which has to do with how can we prevent ourselves from falling prey or victims to gender-based violence. So there are different ways that we can prevent gender-based violence from happening. But before I talk about the different ways we can prevent gender-based violence from happening, it's important for you to know that it is never the victim's fault. And by victim, I mean the person who the abuse has been committed to. And so sometimes, even though I'll give you certain tips that you would use right now to prevent gender-based violence, sometimes you might do all of these things, right, and still fall a victim. But I want you to remember that Elizabeth said today that it is never, ever, in whatever situation or circumstance, your fault, but the fault of the perpetrator who is the rapist. But of course, there are certain things that you can do to limit your chances or your risks of getting or falling prey to gender-based violence. And of course, the first would be do not go to isolated areas alone. Two, make sure you walk in the company of trusted friends. Okay, so do not go to isolated areas alone. Make sure you walk in the company of trusted friends. If you go to a party, make sure you do not leave your drink unattended. So it's extremely important. Also make sure that if you're going anywhere, make sure a family member or a close friend has an idea or has information about where it is you're going to and where it is you're going to meet. Also ensure that when you're going to certain areas where you know you get to see a lot of people around, like men around, make sure you wear appropriate clothing. But again, I would say this, regardless of all of these prevention tips that I've stated or I've written on the board, if at all, even after doing all of these things, you still fall a victim to gender-based violence, please remember that it is never your fault and you can always get the necessary support that is needed. So I'm going to talk now about the different effects of gender-based violence. So there are different consequences for gender-based violence, right? And those consequences vary from being health consequences to physical consequences to emotional consequences. And so I'm talking about the effects. Okay, and so when we talk about the health consequences of gender-based violence, the first has to do with sexually transmitted infections. We have depression or suicidal thoughts. We have behavioral such as withdrawal / isolation. We have contracting of HIV and AIDS. We have unwanted pregnancy. We have rejection from family and friends. And so I'll just stop here. But there are so many other consequences of gender-based violence. And why am I talking about the effects and the consequences? It's just for you to know that there's never anything good that comes out from gender-based violence. And you should never at any point in time be a perpetrator, by committing gender-based violence to anybody. It's extremely important. And for you to also know that if at all any of this happens to you, that you can definitely get the necessary and needed help that you need. And this takes me to my last segment of today's topic, and that has to do with sources of help. So if at all you know of somebody or you yourself are someone who has either experienced any form of gender-based violence, or you know a friend or a neighbor or someone you stay with that has experienced a form of gender-based violence, there are places where they can actually get needed help and support. And so I'll quickly talk about that. Okay, and so let's talk about the sources of help for GBV survivors. Okay, and of course, the first source of help would be the family. Secondly, we have CSOs / NGOs. Three, we have religious institutions. Four, we have government agencies, such as the Domestic Sexual Violence Response Team. Five, okay, I think I'll just stop here. So we have the family, we have CSOs, which are civil society organizations, we have NGOs, that's non-governmental organizations, we have religious institutions, we have government agencies, such as the Domestic Sexual Violence Response Team, and yes, we have healthcare workers. / providers, okay? And also friends, such as yourself, can also be a source of help and a source of support to a survivor of gender-based violence. But I want to say something now. If in any situation, any of these sources of help is the culprit, right, or the perpetrator, then it means that you go to the next available source of help. What do I mean? For example, if the perpetrator of that form of gender-based violence is a father who has abused or raped his child, then you know that the family no longer suffices as a source of help. And so in this situation, you could either go to probably the religious institution, or you could go to a government agency or an NGO or a CSO. So it's important that you have this in mind. But all of these different places or people that I've listed on the board are different sources of help for gender-based violence survivors. I'll wrap up with this. Anybody can commit gender-based violence. And I mean anybody. And research has gone to show us that 80% of people who commit gender-based violence are always people who are known to the victims. They are usually familiar faces, right? And so it's important that you're careful. It's important that you pay attention to your environment. It's important that you speak out when you see someone trying to make any form of attempt to commit gender-based violence, either to you or to somebody around you or to someone that you know. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask by going to learnerscorner.org, and I'll definitely provide answers to your questions. I hope you enjoyed this session. And, gender-based violence certainly is not the end of the world. And so if you know of anybody that has been a victim of gender-based violence, with the necessary support and with love from their friends and family members, they can definitely, move away from it and achieve whatever it is that they set their minds to. Never let gender-based violence stop you from achieving your dreams and your goals. So thank you for listening, and see you in the next class. Bye.